Hey, what's up, guys? Hello, so Footballtalk here. We've reached the end of our positional draft breakdowns with the most anticipated episode, the quarterbacks. With this, all the write-ups are now up on my page, hellotofootballtalk.com, and 6 of them I have a video on here on my YouTube channel, so make sure to check those out later, subscribe to my channel, and follow me on social media. The links for all that are down below in the description. As far as this group of signal callers goes, I believe there's a big 4 that all deserve to go in the top 10 of the draft because they have superb athleticism and arm talent. Then there's 2 guys that are kind of in a tier of their own in the late first and mid-day 2 window respectively. And after that, there's a big drop-off and more projects which aren't close to being ready to start but have the tools to develop in the right situation. Let's start with 3 names that I think deserve to be mentioned here. I'm still working for the very back end of this class, which likely aren't going to get drafted, but I haven't identified anybody that needs to be mentioned here. And I didn't call these guys just missed the cut like usual, because all 3 of them to me are backups due to a lack of physical gifts in order to translate to the next level. For Ian Book, he can work deep into progressions in a West Coast offense, and he's a gamer, but he has an average arm at best and had elite pass protection at Notre Dame. Sam Ehlinger was a great college quarterback who runs as hard as anybody I've ever seen, can really let it fly, but his accuracy is just not consistent enough, and he makes some questionable decisions. And then Shane Buechele from SMU has a whippy arm, really tough guy, and sees the whole field, but definitely a limited arm and athletic ability. So I don't want to waste too much time here, and just get right into the list, with number 10, Feleipe Franks from Arkansas, 6'6", 235 pounds, a redshirt senior. Just outside the top 50 overall recruits back in 2016, Franks redshirted his first year at Florida and then had kind of an up and down debut campaign before he really turned it on his sophomore year. However, the third game of the 2019 season, he suffered a gruesome looking ankle injury and opened the door for Trask, who obviously turned himself into a Heisman Trophy finalist, and Franks was forced to transfer inside the SEC to Arkansas. In his 1 season there, his completion percentage dramatically increased to 68.5, averaging 234 passing yards per game and a touchdown to interception ratio of 17-4. Franks was very well received at Arkansas and was the team captain for his only season there, while also showing a lot of growth as a player, I thought. Offers a very sturdy frame and arguably the strongest arm in his class, releases the ball from a balanced base and can really hit the back foot and let it fly. He is the farthest throw Pro Football Focus has ever charted in college football. Last season, his passer rating actually increased by depth of target, with it being at 147 on those passes of 20 plus yards. In that Arkansas offense, he was asked to do a lot of soft play action fakes and RPOs, where it really stood out to me how quickly he got his body pointed at the target, and his pass catchers at the next level will appreciate how rapidly the ball gets there on throws over the middle, so they can protect their bodies and get upfield. And we've seen Franks change up ball speeds and the arm angles that he uses. He has a really strong lower body to shake off sacks, but also the quickness to make charging rushers miss. Can really dip away from defenders, drop his weight and then redirect. All while his eyes usually stay down the field as he's buying extra time and can reset his base before letting the ball go. And there's some creativeness to his off-script game, signaling receivers to come back to the ball and finding guys working across the field late. He can be a real weapon in the quarterback run game with those long strides. Ran a 4.59 in the 40 at the Arkansas Pro Day, and there's some elusiveness to him once he gets into the open field as well. However, certainly an elongated release, very floppy overall. A lot of it comes from his upper body, and there can be a lot of inconsistencies because of that in his accuracy. Rather slow as a processor, and he's late on plenty of throws further into the progression, as well as making some very questionable decisions under pressure when he can't set his feet to throw, with a lot of forced balls towards the sideline and down the field. A boneheaded interception late in the 2019 opener when he was still at Florida against Miami comes to mind, which almost cost him the game. And there's just too much schoolyard type of running around and releasing the ball with parallel feet a lot of times. Also gives edge rushers easy chances to strip the ball with that long release, which you can see with 20 career fumbles. Kind of similar to another guy in the SEC that will come up later, Franks really changed my mind about him a lot this last season. There's still plenty of issues with poor decisions when he doesn't confidently step into throws, and he would certainly benefit from tightening up his release, but unlike a lot of other names in this area, I think he has the arm talent and athleticism to potentially develop into a starter if he's allowed to sit and learn for a couple of years. And now let's get to the guy who beat out Franks at Florida and Kyle Trask, 6'5", 240 pounds, a redshirt senior. Outside the top 2,000 overall recruits back in 2016, was buried on the Florida depth chart early on, and then took over the starting spot once Franks got hurt early on in the 2019 season, and Trask immediately upgraded their play at the position in a major way. However, he took another major step last season when his completion percentage improved to 69%, throwing for almost 4,300 yards and an FBS leading 43 touchdowns versus 8 picks in those 12 games, and he finished third in the Heisman voting. Presents that Ben Roethlisberger type of massive build and showed a lot of poise for his young age. Like I said in 2020, I thought he took another major step forward and set a new SEC record by throwing at least 4 touchdowns in each of the first 6 games. And what really stood out to me was the control of the offense and how competitive he was. Shows good rhythm to his dropbacks with some bounce to his steps before he releases the ball. Throws a tight spiral on those deep balls where he can really arc it over the top and has the nose of the ball dive to the turf. Routinely wins with recognition of defenses and precise ball placement, and excels at putting the ball on the top shelf for his star tight end Kyle Pitts and other guys. Ripped off a lot of big gains on seams and slot fade routes, and had a passer rating of about 140 on passes of 20 plus air yards, while also taking good care of the ball. Trask shows great maturity in his decision making and how he handles suboptimal situations, not panicking in those. Offers a sturdy base and has no fear with rushers around him. He quickly gets to his hot reads and got a lot of big yards after the catch plays by his backs when he realized they were unaccounted for. Trask does a good job of using solo movement to operate within the pocket, sliding and bailing around just to buy a little bit of extra time. He diced up Georgia's feared defense in the matchup last season, and Florida was as close as any team in the country to beating Alabama in the SEC title game. Trask is a tank on quarterback sneaks or just going up the gut from shotgun alignment in those short yardage situations, where a lot of times he's checking into those plays because he sees those really soft box counts against defenses having to play dime against them. However, Florida's quarterback certainly didn't finish his career on a high note, throwing 3 interceptions and no touchdowns in the blowout loss to Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl, even though he was without his 4 leading receivers. And you look at the situation that he was in, a lot of the success by that Gator offense was thanks to head coach Dan Mond's ability to put defenses in conflict with play design and spacing. You saw so many open shallow crosses, screens and pick plays, and he was protected to the point where they were throwing bubble screens on 3rd and long. Trask is constantly high and soft over the middle, making his targets vulnerable to some big hits. And you think of it, Mac Jones is getting criticized for the weapons that he had around him a lot of times, but Trask had the most unstoppable pass catcher in the country in Kyle Pitts, another first-round receiver in Kadarius Toney, and another very solid late-rounder. Most importantly, however, the lack of mobility that he displays is very concerning in the modern NFL. Sometimes it seems like he has cinder blocks on his feet, and so many times there's a lane right in front of him to just run downhill, but he gets caught from behind an instant later. And while we of course know that college football counts sacks as negative rushing yards, to have 58 yards on the ground on 127 carries these last 2 years, that's pretty mind-blowing. And he also doesn't have that quick twitch ability to climb the pocket and get away from rushers. Trask had to sit out Senior Bowl week due to an injury, which could have certainly helped him, because I was just so uninspired by his tape. When you look at all the production that is served up on a silver platter, and the stats just not nearly being justified by what I see on tape. I know that I'm lower than most people on Trask, just because I don't think he has starter traits. I think he can be a very good backup, sturdy pocket passer who can execute full-field reads and win with ball placement, but he simply cannot move, and I don't think he can create anything on his own. At number 8, with Jamie Newman from Georgia, or you can call Wake Forest as well, 6'3", 235 pounds, a redshirt junior. Newman is a former top 20 dual-threat quarterback back in 2016, but redshirted his first year on campus, and then only took over late the following season. In 2019, his only full season as a starter, he completed 61% of his passes for 2,868 yards and 26 touchdowns, compared to 11 interceptions, while almost adding another 600 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground. He transferred to Georgia as a graduate student, but then opted out of last season. This guy can really spin the ball, and he's looking to push it down the field, drops a number of times on tape, and those deep balls arrive at the target always seemingly helmet or higher. really making use of that tall receiving corps that he had at Wake Forest. Overall, he completed 28 of 63 passes of 20 plus yards for about 1,150 yards and 10 touchdowns compared to 3 interceptions. Off those go balls, he's very effective on those timing-based routes to the outside, like hitches and curls. Newman has really soft feet inside the pocket and can hold safeties with his eyes, has the power to throw the ball through a wall when he drives it down the seams, and when he puts it all together, it can be a beautiful thing. Newman has the tools and was put in position to make those throws off-platform routinely, can put some passes on the screws while getting already wrapped up by a defender, and has a very strong lower body in general to get away from guys late. The Wake Forest offense was helpful to some degree, but they also asked him to make some throws from really weird settings. There were plenty of RPOs with glance routes and those built-in pump fakes, but then he also had to walk up to the line of scrimmage on those weird RPO mesh points and release it like a yard from the line of scrimmage. Newman was less than 50 yards shy of leading his team in rushing yards in 2019, with a lot of zone reads and quarterback draws, has some shake to him to make defenders miss in the open field, and finishes runs in a very physical fashion to where he can bounce off tacklers and gain yards through contact. With that being said, Newman was a completely different player, it felt like, once his number one receiver in Sage Surratt went down in 2019. He doesn't fully rotate through, but kind of pivots off that front foot and chucks it out of there with more of a flick of the hips most times. He also pats the ball a lot before releasing it, and because of that the arm angle can break. And he's literally falling backwards at times when he feels rushers crashing in on him. His pocket movement isn't very effective, and he lacks some awareness for the rush around him, while needing to speed up that internal clock and not taking as many sacks. Newman tends to stay out on his primary target at times, and still has plenty of room to grow in terms of manipulating defenders post-snap. There's just not a lot of high-level anticipatory throws or layup balls in between zones. I believe Newman has the physical traits of a starter, but he's just so all over the place with his mechanics and accuracy because of it. To me, he's more of a developmental type of player who has the tools to become a quality starter, but is far from it at this point. The Wake Forest coaches described him as one of the hardest workers, and he really competes at a high level regardless of time and score. He just needs time and a quarterback drill sergeant to be able to get it done consistently. At number 7, with Davis Mills from Stanford, 6'4", 220 pounds, a senior, once the number 1 overall quarterback recruit in the country in 2017, over guys like Tua Tagovailoa. Mills redshirted his first year at Stanford, and then was barely used as a backup before he was inserted midway through the 2019 season once KJ Costello got hurt, and he set the school record with 504 passing yards against Washington State. Over his 11 total starts, he completed 66.4% of his passes for 3,350 yards and 18 touchdowns compared to 8 interceptions. This guy is a quick rhythm passer who has a plan before the snap and takes what defenses give him by alignment to go with maybe the most rapid release in the class. He displays excellent anticipation to routinely release the ball before receivers get out of their breaks, and he's very in sync with the timing and drops of that Stanford offense, getting the ball out right as the back foot hits the ground, and that does not change when he has to turn his back to the defense on play action. Mills quickly plants his feet on the ground and grabs a lot of turf with those cleats, has enough zip on the ball to fit it in there to his wideouts on quick in-breaking routes, with a linebacker drifting that way, but usually protects his targets on those throws over the middle. You see him deliver with touch to make those layered throws over a linebacker gaining depth, or over the head of a trailing defenders down the field. There's some perfect go balls right in stride on tape, as well as those well-placed back shoulder fades. According to Pro Football Focus, Mills had an adjusted completion percentage of 78.8% last season, and his raw numbers looked a lot worse because his receivers dropped 11% of passes. Coming out of Stanford, Mills has experience operating in a pro-style offense with different depth of drops from under center and play action, where he shows the fluid flip with the hips to rapidly bring them around and throws to the left after faking the run that way initially. He recognizes when a corner is squatting in cover 2 and the safety doesn't widen quickly enough in order to attack down the sideline, and he routinely exposes voids in zone coverage, while being very aware of where the sticks are depending on down and distance. Mills has some elusiveness in the pocket, reducing the near shoulder and sliding through creases to find a new platform to throw from, and when he decides to tuck it, he has some shiftiness and pretty good straight line speed to him. With that in mind, he still has very limited experience, with only 12 career starts and just under 500 dropbacks, and over that relatively short stretch, he still had 17 turnover-worthy plays. He's just so inconsistent with his release and position of his feet when he just feels a little pressure or push up the middle, either fading away or raising up and kind of pushing the ball out. He had some troubling misses and forced balls in the UCLA game last season in particular. Brings his arm back pretty far and the ball tends to sail on him at times, which leads to some misses on routine screen passes. And Mills is a bit of a statue back there who lacks the burst to escape the rush more often than not. Plus, on those deeper developing concepts, he's not nearly as willing to pull the trigger. For Davis Mills to receive some first round buzz, to me is pretty absurd. However, there are certainly things about the Stanford quarterback that you really like in terms of the quick release, the accuracy from a clean pocket, and some of the manipulation of defenses that he's already flashed in very limited time on the field. He certainly needs some time to clean up his mechanics and improve his play under pressure, but I could see him developing into a starter down the road if he's put in the right situation. His best fit to me would be in an Erhard Perkins offense where they attack the defense horizontally and kill them with 100 paper cuts. Up to this point, all these guys were more day 3 projects, but now let's get into some guys that I really get excited about, with the first one being Kellen Mond from Texas A&M. 6'2", 205 pounds, a senior, was the number 1 dual threat quarterback in the country in 2017, started his freshman season as a backup, but then took over the final 8 games, and over his last 3 years, under head coach Jimbo Fisher, he has completed just over 60% of his passes for 8,300 yards and 63 touchdowns, compared to 21 interceptions, to go with another 1,269 yards and 17 touchdowns on the ground. He joined Tim Tebow and Dak Prescott as the only 3 SEC quarterbacks to record over 9,000 passing and 1,500 rushing yards in his career, and he has also won 3 straight bowl games. Mond presents a very athletic frame with broad shoulders and no ounce of fat on his body. A&M still relies heavily on the run game and play action shots off it, but Mond has become a much more surgical passer who can take this offense down the field with a bunch of underneath throws, has those 10-inch hands to really control the ball, and the whole throwing process from the setup, the loading up, and releasing the ball has become pretty much automatic for him. He shows great accuracy and touch from the pocket, makes some quick reads and decisions, plus he can get the ball there in a hurry. He really ate in the 10 to 12 yard range over the middle with a bunch of dig routes. And so many times the ball is right on the money with his feet square from the mesh point on RPO concepts. Plus he has the velocity to fit in some tight window throws. Takes advantage of leverage and cushions that defenses give his pass catches. And he does an excellent job of laying the ball over underneath defenders. I saw a ton of impressive anticipation throws under pressure from the pocket without being able to get his feet in position. Plus, his completion percentage has increased all 4 years with the Aggies. Mond is very sudden with getting his shoulders pointed at the target as he's going through his reads. He may have his whole body facing one receiver and then in one motion get the ball to the next man in the progression, but also quickly getting it out there to his outlets. Mond's development as a drop-back passer is what has me looking at him as a completely different player, but he still has that great athletic ability to save broken plays, buying a little bit of extra time, like backing out and getting out wide. You see a lot of those high arc and deep balls, setting up after rolling the pocket. Plus he has the speed to gash defenses if they leave space open in front of him, to go with a little 1-2 step in the open field to get away from guys. And Mond has shown the ability to step up in big games on several occasions, like against LSU in 2019 in a 7 overtime game, or when he brought the Aggies back against Florida in a shootout this last season. He has recorded over 1,500 total dropbacks in the SEC, and then earned MVP honors at the Senior Bowl game, where I really liked what I saw from him in terms of decision making and driving the ball. On the flip side, Mond is pretty technical and almost robotic as a thrower. He's very to the book with his game overall and doesn't show much creativity. I'd like to see him use his athleticism more to extend plays and just take off himself. He's a bit of a sitting duck back there, to where sometimes I just want to scream, move, and he doesn't have the greatest feel for defenders around him. There are some impressive moments in terms of understanding defensive rotations and reading body languages of safeties, but there's also some head-scratching plays where he fails to come up with the right solutions against very simple, straightforward shells that you just wouldn't expect from a 3.5-year starter. For example, throwing a speed out with his wide out from a reduced split, with a corner having outside leverage and squatting on the route. Mond had some issues when the picture changes after the snap, plus he had 22 career fumbles in twice as many games. I wouldn't have expected this as all a year ago, where I thought Mond was more of a 5th or 6th round pick, and there's certainly a big drop off from number 5, but I think after those guys, Mond is clearly the most intriguing option, with the growth that he has shown playing with timing and accuracy from within the pocket, and that legitimate dual threat ability that he has. I think he can fit really in any offense, whether it's making quick reads in a West Coast type of attack, getting him on the move in more of a zone and bootleg approach, or really using that running ability in an offense that includes more designed or option quarterback runs. But now let's get into the top 5, here with Mac Jones from Alabama, 6'3", 215 pounds, a redshirt junior. A 3-star recruit in 2017, Jones did a pretty good job filling in for Tua Tagovailoa over the second half of the 2019 season, completing just over 70% of his passes with an average of 11.6 yards per attempt and 11 touchdowns compared to only 2 interceptions over his 4 games as a starter. Then last season, he beat out another 5-star recruit in Bryce Young and put together a season for the ages, which really nobody expected, as he set NCAA records for highest completion percentage at 77.4% and college passer rating at 203.1, throwing for 4,500 yards and 41 touchdowns compared to only 4 interceptions, while averaging over 11 yards per attempt again in 13 games. And he finished second behind only his top receiver in Devontae Smith in the Heisman voting. Jones has a really quick release, which fits well with that Alabama screen and RPO heavy offense. However, he's at his best on those rainbow deep balls, and he also excelled on those touch throws to layer passes in between zones. On passes of 20 plus yards last season, he went 33 of 56, including 17 touchdowns and a nation-leading 25.4 yards on average per attempt. I think Mac's arm is much better than it gets credit for, always throwing pretty much a perfect spiral, and he made a lot of those pro-level throws at Alabama. Extremely consistent and sharp with his footwork, anticipates throwing windows, and lets the ball go so it arrives there right in time, and he always follows through accordingly. He displays beautiful ball placement in order to throw receivers open while minimizing the risk of interceptions. And what's really an underrated ability is when you have a receiver open to not slow them down and put the ball where they can maximize yards after the catch, which Mac did time and time again, while also taking really good care of the ball with only 4 picks and 2 fumbles last season. He's slick with his eyes and head fakes to manipulate safeties and open up seams in the coverage. And while he won't blow you away with his athleticism or ridiculous scramble plays, he shows great subtle pocket movement and the ability to make his linemen look good, or just buy a little bit of that extra time by sliding or shuffling around, and he doesn't shy away from hanging in there and taking shots in order to deliver the ball down the field. And whenever he's moving around, he always stays in a throw-ready position throughout that process. On the move, he can maintain a tight spiral and leads receivers away from coverage. Plus, when it's like 3rd and 5, he can pick up the necessary yardage with his feet. However, it's his processing ability that is really unmatched in this class, being able to work through progressions like a machine, and that's kind of also how I would describe him as a thrower, with that ultra-consistent accuracy. You listen to offensive coordinator Steve Sarkisian talk about how quickly he was able to install new parts of the offense, with Jones being able to master them quickly. And then you saw it at the Senior Bowl as well, that attention to detail, the ability to take on information, respond to it, the accuracy, and just the command that he had once he got into that environment with NFL coaches. With that being said, Jones simply doesn't have the big arm that those other guys in front of him do, and if you let all 5 guys run next to each other, he's the one who's really going to stand out for not looking good. At Alabama, he certainly benefited from supreme offensive line and skill position play around him, and Steve Sarkisian schemed open receivers for easy yards after catch throws on mesh concepts and screens more so than any other team in the country. Devontae Smith also bailed him out a few times by working back to the ball aggressively and wresting the ball out of the hands of a defender. Jones clicks his heels a little too much, and at times you see him ending up throwing the ball with his feet planted to the ground. Overall, he gets to his check down too quickly at times, not allowing something to develop first. And for such a vanilla guy, it's kind of weird to say it, but he's been overhyped this offseason. You look at his pro day where everybody's gushing about him, there were some underthrown deep balls which you also saw on tape. So while I had to mention it here, especially when it comes to the elite protection that he got, I don't really understand how the main negative for Jones is that he had so much talent around him at the skill positions, when compared to Tua Tagovailoa a year ago, he really only had one of those 4 first-round receivers for the majority of games, considering Jalen Waddle broke his ankle 4 weeks into the season, For me, it's much more about the lack of elite physical ability compared to the big four. His ability to process information pre and post snap, the consistent accuracy, and the ability to run an offense effectively will make him a long-term quality starter in the league, I believe, but he doesn't have that kind of talent to create on his own and save an offense when the original play breaks down. So to me, it makes more sense to get him as a mid to late first rounder when you already have a lot of pieces on the roster around him. Right in front of him, with another guy from a national championship team, only that it comes from the FCS, in Trey from North Dakota State, 6'4", 230 pounds, only a redshirt sophomore. With offers from the Big Ten to play linebacker or safety, Lance banked on himself as a quarterback, and it definitely paid off. In his first and only season as a starter, he became the first ever freshman to win the FCS Walter Payton Award, combining for 42 total touchdowns and just one turnover, which came on a fumble 16 plays into the season. The Bison finished with another perfect record and national title. However, they didn't play a season in 2020 and only had one showcase game against Central Arkansas, which they won, but Lance threw his first ever pick in college. Unlike a lot of the quarterbacks that we've coming out in the last few years, Lance wasn't one of those spread, RPO-oriented offenses, but rather made throws down the field and created big plays in a pro-style attack with a lot of big personnel and play-action off it. He is experienced with a multitude of sleight-of-hand fakes and carries those play fakes nicely to enhance their effect. Lance is an absolute cannon of an arm, and you see the confidence that he has, even when he's a tad late on throws, to still bang it in there. Just such easy zip on the ball and the raw power to make those high difficulty NFL throws on deep outs from the opposite hash look routine. On the move, you see him complete those 15 to 18 yard comeback routes with both feet off the ground at times, but also has the arc on those deep balls to make it land in the bucket for his receivers on those vertical shots. His 11.5 yards depth of target in 2019 was higher than what any other quarterback had last season. I love what he does in the play action game in terms of hiding the ball and not losing much time to get it out of his hands again. Quickly sets those feet and then transitions that weight back forward. And he can really stop his momentum when he gets to the top of his drop, which is phenomenal at his size. Plus he also has no issues throwing the ball on the run, where he oftentimes slightly throttles down before launching the ball down the field. Lance has a really good grasp of the Bison offense in terms of what they want to set up and how he wants to lead defenders with his eyes and body language. He's very in tune with the progressions and dropbacks, letting the ball go on time consistently. And he has experience with those full field reads and seems to clearly have the football IQ to learn a more advanced offense quickly. According to the coaches at North Dakota State, he was responsible for all the checks and the protections. Lance shows those sudden shoulder turns when he progresses from high to low or decides to check it down to his backs or outlets. And he has such a strong lower body to get away from rushers and make something happen. I've seen him literally shake off an unblocked defender from the edge who really jumped on his back, and he's still throwing a touchdown. He has a supreme athletic skill set and was heavily involved in the run game, on power plays, draws, and as a scrambler of course. He's a load to bring down and has the speed to run away from pretty much anybody in the FCS competition. But he's also kind of shifty and finishes strong, trucking some defenders at the end of his runs. In the FCS championship game in 2019, Lance was basically the Bison's lead back with 30 carries for 166 yards, including a long scramble on 3rd and forever in the fourth quarter to basically win the game. Even though Lance was phenomenal in his 1 year as a starter, his process of working through information is still a tick slow, and he had a few plays that he got away with that could have easily resulted in turnovers. You see him oftentimes throw the ball to where the receivers are supposed to be, no matter if they're covered or not, and he had quite a few completions served up on a silver platter, where he had somebody wide open wheeling out late on the original side of the play fake or something like that. Lance puts himself at risk for injury on several occasions with the way he engages as a runner in contact. He has a tendency of having the ball's nose point to the ground too much on underneath throws in particular, where he kind of tries to shorten his motion. And I think he needs to improve his feel for pressure off the edge and climb the pocket more routinely. He certainly was protected in the Bison offense, not only in terms of the offensive line, being by far the best one in the conference and having the best team overall, but he only attempted more than 23 passes once in his only season as a starter, and then had a very shaky performance, I thought, in his only game of 2020 against Central Arkansas. However, you do have to put the performance into some context, considering that North Dakota State had only had 1 week of preparation, while their opponents had already played 3 games, At his pro day, I thought the ball really jumped out of Lance's hands, and he had tightened up his footwork and release. The mainstream media is just so quick to jump to conclusions and make those general statements. Of course, 17 career starts aren't a lot for Lance, and he'll have some developing to do against more complex NFL defenses and stuff like that. But in terms of working inside the structure of an offense, the footwork, the big time throws he can make, and how dangerous he is as a runner on top of that, I think he can be a successful starter as a rookie in the right offense. In particular, I think he would be a perfect fit for one of those Shanahan type of systems, and I actually believe that he's gonna go third overall to San Francisco. Slightly ahead of Lance, I have Justin Fields from Ohio State, 6'3", 225 pounds, a junior. Fields competed with Trevor Lawrence for the top quarterback recruit in the nation in 2018. He had to sit on the bench his first year at Georgia behind Jake Fromm, and then decided to transfer after the season due to some alleged racial comments, and instantly became a Heisman Trophy frontrunner for Ohio State. Over his 2 seasons there, he completed 68.4% of his passes for almost 4,400 yards and 63 touchdowns versus 8 interceptions, to go with almost 900 more yards and 15 touchdowns on the ground in 24 games. He was a first-team All-Big Ten selection, won the conference, and faced Clemson in the playoff both years, winning the latter one and making it to the national title game, even though the Buckeyes were outmatched by Alabama. Fields has the build of a Greek god, and he can put the zip on the ball to make those fire-hash throws and drill seam routes in with safeties in range constantly. He had a perfect touchdown to interception ratio in the red zone in 2019 at 24-0, thanks to throwing some absolute bullets. You routinely see him place the ball away from defenders in the hip pocket of his target. He clearly has the arm strength to push the ball down the field and was one of the most lethal deep ball throwers in the country these last 2 years. Fields arguably has the best accuracy from a clean platform of all quarterbacks in the draft. Overall in his career, he produced only 18 turnover-worthy plays and significantly decreased his number of fumbles last year, going from 9 to 2 in 4 versus 9 games. When he's on, he's very hard to stop. You saw him go off for 6 touchdowns against Clemson in a college football semifinal at the start of the year, beating tight coverages with rifles and hitting his receivers streaking downfield, despite taking a huge shot at his ribs early on and having to kind of gut it out. Fields is very sturdy inside the pocket, with quiet feet and little wasted movement. He can put the ball out in front with his feet planted into the ground, as there's trash around his legs and he's a free rusher charging at him. He has that Deshaun Watson quality, where he can make an unblocked rusher miss or shake off a sack attempt because of how strong his base is, to extend the play and oftentimes take off for key scramble yardage. He consistently finds ways to escape and has the acceleration to not get caught from behind on too many occasions. Fields allows you to move the pocket, and on those rollouts, he maintains velocity on the ball, thanks in part to going from sideways to vertically in order to flip his hips. He can power the ball to the sideline off the wrong foot, or lob it over defenders who have to respect him as a runner. And he's a dangerous threat to pull the ball in zone replays and can quickly pick up chunk yards. He had legitimate 4.4 speed, which he proved at his pro day, and a really strong lower body to gain yards through contact. With that being said, there are certainly some issues with Fields' mechanics. He can get pretty narrow with his base and a little floppy with his arm angles. He doesn't really create opposites between his upper and lower half, which limits the hip rotation and forces his arm to do all the work. Because of that, his release points vary a lot, and he kind of guides the ball to receivers a lot of times rather than just firing it there. I hate that there's a narrative out there that Fields is not able to work through progressions, because I've seen him get to numbers 3 and even 4. To me, it's more about poor eye discipline, to where the pattern is designed to go to number 1 on deeper developing routes, but he also leads defenders there and especially stays on it when the picture changes post-snap. And then his footwork tends to get sluggish and slow while he's processing information mentally, or there's a little extra bounce, which leads to him being late on throws. Blitz recognition was a problem for Fields in 2020, and he has to learn when to live for another down, not forcing something when he's already wrapped up basically. You saw it against Northwestern in the Big Ten title game, and especially against Indiana mid-season, when he threw 3 picks and let the Hoosiers hang around. Because of the inconsistency in mechanics and being disciplined with his eyes, I think Fields will have some growing moments early on in his career, but his playmaking ability and competitiveness will get him over those things. I believe there's some separation between the top 2 quarterbacks and Fields, but I have no idea how he seemingly has been sliding down draft boards, and why nobody else seems to get looked at as closely as him. Fields is a special athlete with tremendous arm talent and somebody who can routinely win out of structure, but at the same time I'm really impressed with how much he gets the job done from within the pocket. Now let's get to a pretty close second in Zach Wilson from BYU, 6'3", 210 pounds, a junior, barely a top 1000 overall recruit in 2018. Wilson kind of came out of nowhere this past season. Over his first 2 years at BYU, he played in 9 games each and put up modest numbers as part of a more run-centric Cougars offense. In 12 games last season, he completed 73.5% of his passes, which was second only behind Alabama's Mac Jones, for 3,700 yards and 33 touchdowns, with a ridiculous 11 yards per attempt and only 3 interceptions, to go with another 254 yards and 10 touchdowns on the ground, and he has been rising up the draft board as pretty much the consensus number 2 overall pick now. Wilson has experience operating from under center, the pistol, and shotgun. He ran a lot of play action at BYU, with his back to the defense, staying in the pocket and on bootlegs. He has such great command of the football, and it's so easy for him to spin it. He uses a lot of torque to create that velocity, and the ball really explodes out of his hands. He's such an incredibly natural thrower who has the arm strength to deliver absolute lasers across the field, but also the touch to loft the ball over a trailing defender, can incorporate different speeds on the ball while having lightning quick feet and release. The quick game should be called very quick with him, where defenses almost can't do anything about it, but it's the ability to throw off different platforms and with different arm angles that really set him apart from anybody in this draft. Doesn't need a lot of space around him and can throw with his feet cockeyed. You see him throw receivers open with ball placement routinely, away from the leverage of defenders, and on some of those on-the-move throws, he really forces receivers to work back towards him or even slide for the ball to avoid the chance of defenders getting a hand on it. Wilson completed an FBS high 62.5% of his passes of 20 plus yards, and he had a PFF grade of 99.9 on those. At the same time, you see him actively pull the ball down when he realizes the chance isn't worth taking, leading to a turnover-worthy play rate of only 1.2% last season. When you really watch Wilson closely, you see that processing of information and the plan that he has before the snap in terms of manipulating single high safeties to open up windows or freezing defenders to open up seam shots, in terms of reading defenses and making more advanced decisions than any of these guys that are in the first round conversation. And his pocket presence and footwork are certainly the best among the top 4. He plays with a confidence and at his own pace and has that internal clock to know when to move. Wilson may not be as fast in a straight line as these other guys in the top 4, but I think he has the best quick twitch athleticism to avoid rushes and extend plays. He can really scoot and is very fleet-footed as a runner. The BYU coaches used his mobility on quarterback draw plays, but he's even more dangerous at extending plays and launching bombs down the field. He made more big-time throws rolling one way and then attacking to the opposite side of the field than any other passer, and he has that innate vision for secondary plays and sees windows open up off script. The Cougars coaching staff trusted him a lot by going for it on 4th down, which they went 12 for 22 on the season. Whether it was against Houston, Boise State, or shredding UCF in the Boca Raton Bowl, he made some incredible throws in all those games, and even in what people call his worst game of 2020 at Coastal Carolina, he made several big-time throws, and his team came up 1 yard short in that final drive in Kevin Dyson fashion in the Super Bowl. With that being said, Wilson did have the luxury of playing behind one of the elite offensive lines in college football, and he wasn't even hit once through the first 3 or 4 games of the season. Plus there were some great chances off play action because they were gashing teams in the run game. Something he definitely needs to improve upon is protecting his receivers from big hits, but not leading them into zone defenders at times. Every once in a while, you will see him leave that back foot outside of his frame rather than bringing it up as he comes forward, and that's when the ball can come out low. Wilson barely won the starting job in 2019, and he certainly benefited from a lower level of competition in his only high-level season. Plus, there are some durability concerns with Wilson because he isn't that physical specimen some of these other guys at the top are. He had labrum surgery in the spring of 2019, and then missed 4 games with a broken thumb the following season. Wilson put on an absolute show at the BYU Pro Day, making all these throws from different platforms and arm angles, and while you obviously shouldn't get too enamored with what guys do during these scripted workouts, you see all of that on tape as well. Wilson was under little pressure behind that phenomenal BYU offensive line, but he didn't have the greatest weapons around him all the time either, and he often gets punished for a weak schedule by a lot of the mainstream analysts, even though the Cougars had nothing to do with those bigger games having to be cancelled due to COVID protocols. Wilson to me is a phenomenal talent and should be a problem in basically any offense that he's put in. But at number 1, I'm gonna go with chalk here, Trevor Lawrence from Clemson, 6'5.5", 220 pounds, a junior. Lawrence enrolled at Death Valley as the number 1 national recruit after beating Deshaun Watson's most important records in the state of Georgia, and he has been the consensus first overall pick for the 2021 draft pretty much since the end of his freshman campaign. Over 40 career games, he has completed exactly 2/3 of his passes for a little over 10,000 yards, 90 touchdowns compared to 17 interceptions, to go with almost another 1,000 yards and 18 TDs on the ground. He won the ACC all 3 years with Clemson, won a national title as a freshman, then made it to another championship game, and finally came up short in the college football playoff semifinal this past season. This guy is a special arm talent who has all the clubs in the bag to lay at a ball, put different arcs on it, and straight up drive it to any spot on the field. He has no issues with those opposite hash throws, completing more of those than almost any other quarterback in college football attempts, and he's very comfortable attacking all areas of the field, which makes the whole field open for his future offensive coordinator. Lawrence throws his guys open with perfect ball placement and lets his playmakers make plays for him. He really excels at putting the ball in certain spots for his big-bodied receivers along the sideline, which you saw time and time again in the 2019 national title game against Alabama to T. Higgins and Justin Ross. At the same time, he also has the zip on the ball to thread and seam routes before the safety can get there, and he already shows some good anticipatory skills to let the ball go before receivers even get into their breaks, as well as great patience to let plays develop overall. Lawrence is not faced by Kellen in the backfield, and he can make defenders look silly for coming in too hot with the way he can get vertically. There are some absolute dimes on tape off his back foot, and the touch the ball comes out with whilst getting hit is pretty remarkable. Lawrence has that suddenness to him inside the pocket and flips those hips through in a whippy fashion. I love the way that he can roll out and escape to his left and then twist his body around to get his shoulders pointed at the target and still fire some lasers. And the heat on the ball doesn't change much on the move overall. At a rather slender frame, you wouldn't necessarily suggest it, but Trevor Lawrence is highly athletic and he's flat out fast. He had almost a 70-yard rushing touchdown against Ohio State in the college football playoff in 2019. Shows the burst to beat edge defenders who try to play in between both options on zone replays, and he helps on those lanes on the inside because of the threat that he has of keeping the ball. Lawrence clearly has all the athletic tools and arm talent that you ever want to see, but what really stood out to me from the first time I saw him was the poise that he displayed on so many occasions. He's more like a 10-year NFL veteran with how level he is with his play and not panic in suboptimal situations. He usually keeps that second hand on the ball when he's moving around, and his eyes stay down the field, and it's those little details like being crisp with ball fakes and the footwork that really make him special as well. There just aren't a ton of issues with Lawrence on tape. He trusts himself to fit in some throws that simply nobody could, especially when he's late on several occasions, which can lead to turnovers. He's not hesitant in his decision making, but he may miss an underneath defender because of it. And I think what gives him the biggest trouble at this point are those more advanced coverage rotations post-snap. He's a bit of an elongated stride as a thrower and definitely needs space to step up into, which pressure up the middle can make it a little tough for him. He has a tendency of getting his eyes locked on a receiver at times, allowing savvy defenders to fall into the ball. And when you look at that Clemson offense, there were a lot of layups with screens, RPOs, and other yards after catch stuff. He led college football with almost 700 yards off screens this past season. Lawrence was on the better team every single conference game that he was in, and other than the championship game his freshman season, the 3 games that he was in where it was even or the other team was maybe even more complete, he was outplayed by the opposite quarterback all 3 times. And if not for miscommunication at the end of the 2019 game against Ohio State, Clemson would have lost all 3 of those. To me, it's a little crazy to think that this is the only player in the draft who doesn't get questioned about anything, ever. There are still things that Lawrence needs to get better at. But with that being said, he still is a can't miss prospect in my opinion. He has elite height, arm talent, athleticism, and leadership abilities. That's why he has been the number 1 overall pick ever since we saw him carve up the Alabama defense in the national championship game when he was only 19 years old. With stability around him, he has a Hall of Fame ceiling. And that wraps up the list. let's quickly run through it again. Like I said, numbers 1 and 2 to me are much closer than most people think. Then there's a small gap, and 3 and 4, Fields and Lance, to me are really neck and neck, but I gave Fields the edge since he's been more of a gamer at the bigger stage. Jones at 5 to me is kind of a tier on his own, and the same is with Mond. After that, all 3 guys to me are more day 3 options who are developmental players. So as much as we hype up this quarterback class, there's about 6 guys that I actually see becoming long-term starters in the NFL. So now let's finish up. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with anybody that you think would be interested in these detailed draft breakdowns. As I already mentioned, the link to my page hellosforfootballtalk.com and the tags for all my social media outlets are linked down below in the description. While the numbers are still limited, I know I got some great people in here that value my work, so if you guys want to support me and help me grow this thing, just make sure to get the word out and engage with me on my social media platforms. I'd really appreciate that. On Friday, I will put up my top 100 overall big board on my page, and I will be back here on YouTube early on next week with my one and only mock draft of the year. Don't miss it. So until then, see you later. Peace.